Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about challenges. For those of you that have not been on this before or on this program before, you are all currently muted. If you have a question, if we get to a point where I ask for questions, the method for making sure you can answer or ask that question is to click that same raise your hand icon. So if you get to a point where something doesn't make sense, click the raise your hand icon. It notifies me and I'll click to unmute you. It's the only way to manage with this many people on the call. Make sure we don't hear a whole bunch of background noise. So any questions, click the raise your hand icon and I'll be happy to unmute you. If you are struggling with that and you want to type a question in the Zoom webinar chat, you're welcome to do that as well. I've got that up on my screen. You can see it also. So there's a number of different ways you can get involved. You can also use the Q&A method if you would like, whichever is your preference. I can see all those and I can manage them as we go. So tonight we're going to talk about challenges. We've got 10 clips we're going to look at from the new FIFA Futuro materials. This is all content that is new, so you won't have seen this yet. And it's from almost all the clips are from the 2018 World Cup, which is great because there's a lot of really good camera angles for us to look at this. So we're going to look at each clip and we're going to dive through what to be looking for with challenges. Again, over here on the left of the side of the screen, you can see the things that we're looking for to make sure we're accomplishing when we pay attention to fouls, no fouls, what misconduct we have. So there's a lot of good discussion clips here, and so we'll dive right in. The first one. Okay, so we're going to go back and watch that one more time. So, using the raise your hand icon, who here has a foul? Thank you. And again, using the raise your hand icon, who here does not have a foul? Okay, so most of us on this call have a foul. So we're going to go through and watch this one again. You hear me in a lot of webinars and a lot of classroom instruction talking about paying a close attention to who initiates contact, because we have to know exactly who creates contact if we're going to call a foul, particularly with tripping calls. And so as we replay this, what I want to do is watch carefully as the attacker runs onto this play. Now, this is hard to pick up, but watch the attacker, the defender's leg. Flashes towards the ball, brings it back down, and at this point is completely out of the way of the attacker. The attacker can run past this with no problem whatsoever, and instead the attacker whips the leg out to the side to initiate that contact and then go to ground. So at first glance, this 100% looks like a foul. But when we look at it closely, defender puts the leg out, misses the ball, but brings the leg back in, out of the path of the attacker, and the attacker whips the leg out to the side. That motion right there is a very unusual motion from an attacker to create the contact and then go to ground. So the answer to this clip from FIFA is they do not want a foul here because the attacker is initiating the contact. Now, again, I'll be the first person to tell you at full speed, that is a very hard decision to make. And we have the ability to go back and watch the replay and see what this looks like. But what we need to start training our eyes is for exactly what we saw when we slowed the replay. And so as this play develops, if you're training your eyes to look carefully at the actions of the defender, you know as this player takes him on that you've got a potential decision to make here. So you can focus your eyes on what the most likely decision is to be, which is in this case is going to be a trip. And if you're going to be paying close attention, you want to watch the actions of the defender closely. And if you do that, you'll see that the defender brings his leg out of the way of the opponent before the ball or before the player gets to him. And then the player lashes the leg out to create that contact. So training your eyes as you know you have an impending decision to make. Once this player clearly goes to take him on, you know you're going to have a decision to make potentially with a trip. Focus your attention on the actions of the defender very, very closely. And if you're able to do that, you perceive here that the defender gets his leg out of the way, doesn't lunge into the attacker, doesn't initiate any contact with the attacker, doesn't go through the attacker for any way, but instead gets out of the way, and we have the attacker create contact with the defender. So there were a few people that raised their hands a second ago. I'm going to lower them. If you have questions on this analysis, now please go ahead and raise your hands. Okay, Alberto, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead. All right, Alberto, there's a problem with your software for some reason. So go ahead and there you are. There we are. Go ahead.
Good. You may want to check with everyone. The video, at least on my end, looks really choppy. So it's very difficult to watch the smooth movement of the legs and the ball and the challenge as such. So
okay, thank you. So let's have a quick show of hands. If you're having trouble viewing this video, raise your hands. Okay, just a handful of people. All right, so I will try to go back through this a little bit more slowly. I was going back and forth pretty choppily, so perhaps that's the issue. So what I'll do is I'll freeze frame it on every point. So here we have the player cutting in. At this point, the player has lunged the leg out, trying to block the ball. And at this point, the defender has brought their legs back out of the way of the opponent and has not sought to initiate any contact. It's at this moment that the attacker swings the leg out of the way of his body in an unnatural way to create that contact with the opponent. So this is why in this case we don't want to have a foul called here, because the attacker has initiated the contact. Mario asked the question, what did the referee team call? It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what the referee team called. We're here to evaluate and analyze a play and discuss what the appropriate decision is. So it doesn't matter when we do clip review. It doesn't matter what the referee team did. We have a question here. Do we have a yellow card for a dive? No, because there was contact created. So for dive, we either want simulation or embellishment. Neither of that case is here. We have a player who has initiated contact, created contact, and gone to ground. We only give cautions for embellishment or for simulation. There was no simulation here. There was contact made. We only want to give a caution for simulation when there was no contact made and the player goes to ground anyway. Jeffrey, unfortunately, I'm not able to allow you to talk, Jeffrey, because I think you're using an older version of Zoom. So if you want to type your question, I'll be happy to answer it. Any other questions or thoughts on the analysis of this clip? And Jeffrey, you're welcome to type your question if you have it still. So again, as the player cuts in, the key to this analysis is at this moment, the defender has gotten out of the way and has not initiated any contact with the opponent. The opponent is the player who initiates the contact, so therefore we don't want to call a foul. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Oops, my tutorial wanted to stop completely. I apologize for that. All right, so the next one. All right, so having watched that, again, let's use the show hands icon. Who here has a foul? Okay. And after I lower all hands, who here does not have a foul? Okay. And of the people who raised their hand for no foul, who wants to volunteer as to why? Use the click hand, raised hand eye contact, or sorry, raise hand if you want to volunteer to explain why you don't think this is a foul. Safe space, no problem. All right. Bruce, go ahead and unmute yourself. You got the floor. Why don't you think this is a foul?
The defending player got the ball then ricocheted off the attacking player's foot, and then the subsequent contact or the player going over him was after that. So the tackle hit the ball first, and it wasn't a reckless challenge.
So just to make sure we're clear, thank you, Bruce. I'm going to go ahead and mute you again. Reckless only pertains to whether or not we have misconduct or not. It's not the actual foul decision. You can have a foul here that's not reckless. So the important part of this tackle, there's two parts, is if unfair contact is made with the opponent. Again, if we use the considerations, one of the first couple of considerations is, does the tackler make unfair contact with the opponent before playing the ball? In this case, the answer here is no. The next question, or I think number three, the number third consideration is, does the opponent make unfair contact with the player after playing the ball? And in both of these examples, there's no unfair contact made with this challenge. Now it looks, and I can see why everybody thinks this could be a foul, because anytime you see a player lunging into a tackle like that, you're inherently going to think there's a little bit of risk to this tackle because the leg is straight, the studs look like they're exposed. What's crucial in making this decision is paying close attention to the mode of contact and point of contact. Hopefully you've heard me say that before. If not, then I'll revisit it really quickly. Your mode of contact is what part of the body is being used to make contact with the opponent. So in this case, the mode of contact would be the bottom of the studs, if that's the contact that is made. The point of contact is where on the opponent's body contact is made. So if this tackle had gone through the knee with the studs, in this example, the mode of contact would be the studs, the bottom of the cleat. The point of contact would be the knee. So in this case, if we're using mode of contact and point of contact in our analysis, what the defender's foot does here is crucial, because the player does go in with the leg straight, does go in with the studs exposed, but before he makes contact, he puts his foot on the ground. So this tackle is not committed with any danger at all to the opponent because the foot goes to the ground. If the foot goes onto the ground, it doesn't leave the studs exposed. When contact is made, as this is done here, it becomes a safe challenge. And you can see here that stud, the lead leg, actually never makes contact with the opponent. Puts his foot into the ball and into the ground, clear of the opponent's foot here, and slides through. And the only contact that ever actually happens between these two is this knee hits the torso area of the defender as the player runs by. So this is a clean challenge. We don't want to call a foul for this one. Primarily, again, because of the contact that is made. That is fair contact. The only contact really coming as the player drags the leg over and goes to ground. Now, this is not an easy decision to get right. I'll be the first person to say. But there's a couple of hints that we can use. First of all, who's the person that's going to be best suited to make this decision? The ref. If you think it's the referee, raise your hand. I am glad to see nobody raise their hand. If you think it's the referee, use the raise your hand icon. Or excuse me, the assistant referee. Perfect. So referees, if we see a tackle like this coming in the direction of the AR, we should depend on the AR to make this decision. If the referee is trying to make this decision, he's guessing at best. There's no imminent offside decision to make because it's just an open challenge. So the assistant referee can be focused on the nature of this challenge. But if for some reason the AR is not focused on this challenge, there is a hint that the referee can use to help make this decision. If this attacker at this point, excuse me, the defender at this point is going across the front of the attacker. If this tackle was angled in towards the opponent, then the nature of this challenge would be very different. But by going across the front of the opponent, it's going to very, very much lessen the risk of this tackle. And so as you're evaluating the defender's approach to this challenge, pay attention to which way they're going. Because as you can see here, the player is running into neutral space and has slid into neutral space across the opponent. And again, if this defender changes the point of or the direction of their challenge and goes into the attacker, now you might be able to think that there's something wrong with that challenge. But you can see here that the defender goes out in front of the attacker to make that contact. And if the assistant referee doesn't react to that challenge, then referees, we shouldn't react to that challenge. And the goal for assistant referees in this moment is to look for the mode of contact and the point of contact. And here, the AR is going to have a very clear view of what the foot does. And this is why the AR doesn't react to this tackle. Any questions on that analysis? Use the raise your hand icon at this time if you have a question on this analysis. Okay, Mark, I'm going to let you talk here. Go ahead. Unmute yourself. Go ahead, Mark. All right, I think we had this problem last time you were on a webinar, so why don't you go ahead and type your question if you have it. Steve, I just allowed you to talk. Go ahead and unmute yourself. You got to click. There you go. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I agree with the initial decision where it's not a foul, but the way the ball carries forward, so it actually ricochets off of the attacker's foot and it goes forward. So the subsequent contact has consequences to the attacker not being able to get to the ball.
Okay, but again, I have to ask you, has unfair contact been made by the defender?
Not the initial contact, but the second contact where the knee of the attacker hits the other person in the back actually impedes him from getting to the ball, which is going to be right in front of him.
Okay, so first of all, has he won the ball here?
Uh,
Does the defender play the ball?
the defender plays the ball, but
Okay,
in the
great.
process
So
of
then, no, hold on, stop. Your
Yeah.
analysis, this is 100% incorrect. This is a fair challenge, no different than any other slide tackle anywhere in soccer where they slide in front of the player, win the ball, and the player falls over the top of them because of the contact that the attacker initiates after the defender has fairly won the ball. So this player falling over this player, the red player falling over the yellow player is not at all the fault of the yellow player. The yellow player has won this ball fairly, and this contact here is not unfair because they've won the ball. Now you have the red player initiating contact here. If the red player wants to get past this, they can jump, they can do any number of things, but this is a 100% fair challenge, and nothing about what happens here is unfair. So you have to sort of recalibrate what fair and unfair is, because this is not a foul. This is not unfair contact here. Now, if the defender never wins the ball, if they just miss and the only contact that happens is that through the back leg, then that's a different story, because they haven't won the ball first. But this is very fair contact when you win the ball, and FIFA's guidance on this is not a foul.
I agree with the fact that it's fair contact. I don't agree that he has won the ball. The red actually won the ball there because it went right in front of him.
Okay, so once again, hold on. So I'm going to stop you. I'm not interested in whether you agree or not, because this comes directly from FIFA. And so what your role is as a referee now is to take guidance from FIFA and wrap your head around it so that you can apply it appropriately, because this comes from FIFA. This isn't Matt Buckman saying that this is not a foul. This is FIFA, the people who write the laws of the game, saying that this is not a foul. The yellow player wins the ball here. This is a fair challenge on the ball, and never makes contact again with the red player until the red player drags his foot over the attacker and goes to ground, or over the defender and goes to ground. This is a 100% fair challenge, and whatever you need to do to wrap your head around that, you need to do, because that guidance is from FIFA. You should not call this a foul. Any other questions from anybody else? Scott, I'm going to get on you there. Go ahead.
Hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. I have a kind of a related extension of this. I was doing a college game.
Okay, Scott, I'm going to go ahead and stop you. We don't tell stories on our webinars, okay? Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one. All right, so I'm going to back this up just a second here. So again, we're going to watch the challenge up here, not the first one with Ronaldo, but the one here. All right, so on that one, use your hands. Who has a foul? Good. Everybody should get that one right. All right, and then I will lower all the hands. Who here has a yellow card? Show of hands. Okay. And who here has a red card? Handful of people showing red card. Okay, so most of us have yellow, a couple of us have red by the showing of the hands. So obviously this is a foul. and we'll talk about here in a second why the referee didn't identify the contact afterwards. The decision we have to make here is this a yellow card or a red card? And so we're going to do a little bit of analysis on this, and to some degree, we're going to recalibrate based on FIFA's current guidance now, the difference between a yellow card and a red card, because we're seeing a little bit of an adjustment from FIFA now in their guidance, which we'll see on the next few clips, as what the threshold is for a yellow card versus a red card. So on this challenge, when we think about the considerations, the mode of contact is harsh. It's the studs, definitely uncomfortable. The point of contact, however, is not to necessarily a very dangerous point of the body. Again, the side of the leg definitely doesn't feel good. Here, though, is the big part. He's stepping on the foot. He's not on the Achilles. He's not on something that's doing a lot of damage. He's basically stepping on the side or the top of the foot there, which, yeah, certainly doesn't feel good, but doesn't risk a lot of injury to the opponent. The big thing here, and the note that FIFA has made on this, the answer to this clip, is that there's not a lot of force in this tackle. We're going to talk a lot tonight when we look at some of the rest of the clips about the amount of force being used to commit a tackle. And that is going to start becoming a more important factor in whether or not we send off a player for a challenge, the amount of force that's used. So in this tackle, what FIFA's guidance and what they're looking for is they want a caution on this tackle, specifically because of the amount of force. And so what we need to evaluate here is, with this challenge, is there a lot of speed? Is there a lot of force in the challenge? And the way that we know there's not is the defender doesn't really go through the player. The tackle or the challenge is more directed into the ground, which has a habit of stopping force from happening, and doesn't go through the player, just makes contact and stops. That's a key difference in the analysis of this clip, is that the defender doesn't go through the opponent with this challenge. He's getting there at about the same time. If you watch it in real time, as he comes into the camera view, the two are running the same direction, which means there's not a lot of combined force, and the player just steps. The defender just sort of steps on the opponent here. Now, a couple of factors going into this, and I mentioned it briefly just a second ago. When two players are running the same direction, that's going to lessen the force to some degree. The bigger factor here is that the tackle, you can see by the opponent's leg, is directed more at the ground than it is through the attacking player. So the defender is going downward motion instead of into the attacker. And that's going to lessen the force of this challenge quite a bit, so that all it is he ends up stepping on his foot. Now, that's still 100% worth a caution because it's reckless, but it's not excessive force. And excessive force becomes a big factor in what FIFA is looking for in deciding whether or not we're sending off or cautioning this player. So again, looking at what we were just looking at, they're both going in the same direction. The player steps on the opponent on the side of the foot. You can see where he releases from. It's the side of the shoe, the side of the foot, which is typically a very hard surface and not one that's going to break easily, or there's not ligaments. There's not a lot of that stuff that would typically have be susceptible to damage. So FIFA's guidance here: direct free kick, yellow card. This is reckless. Studs to back of cleats, not a lot of force. So that's the guidance from FIFA. The studs are to the back of the cleats here, not to the Achilles, and there's not a lot of force. Any questions on that analysis? Show of hands. Okay, good. So FIFA has yellow card here. On to the next one. Okay, so show of hands, who has a foul on the yellow player? Handful of people with foul on the yellow player. Who has a foul on the red player? Okay, a few more hands. And who has no foul? Okay, more no fouls than not. All right. So we're going to look at a couple things with this clip. And again, we're going to think about the FIFA considerations. At this moment, nobody has done anything wrong. Red player kicks the ball, yellow player's running through. At that moment, the red player puts his studs through the shin of the opposing player. And so if we look at consideration number 3, the question asks, does the defender make unfair contact with the opponent after playing the ball? Who here, by a show of hands, thinks studs to the shin is unfair? Very much so. So the difference between the first clip the second clip we looked at, where the defender wins the ball and slides through, and there's minimal contact between the hip and the knee as the player slides, this is unfair every day of the week. By putting the stud through the shin, that's unfair contact. So that leads us here to having a foul against the red player. Even though they've just won the ball here, the tackle or the challenge is committed in a way that creates unfair contact with the opponent after the ball goes away, studs into the shin. So the next question becomes, if we see this in a game, show of hands, who thinks this is a yellow card? Okay, show of hands, does anybody think this is a red card? Good, no red cards. Does anybody think this is no card? Okay, so for those of you who raised your hand with no card, the thing I'd ask you to consider again is mode of contact and point of contact. The mode of contact here is the bottom of the studs. The leg is straight and the studs are exposed and end up going directly into the shin of the opponent. This is a reckless challenge. Now again, does the red player mean to do this when they jump into this clip or in this challenge? Absolutely not. But the nature of the challenge here becomes reckless when contact is made. The studs going into the shin like that is reckless. Anytime we see studs going into a player that way, that's a reckless challenge. So just like the last clip that we had where the studs went down on top of the foot, we have the same thing, the studs going into the shin. FIFA's answer here, reckless tackle, contact with studs to shin after playing the ball. We have a direct free kick against the red team and a caution. So having said that, raise your hand if you have a question here. Hit the raise your hand icon if you have a question here. Okay, Mario, I just unmuted you or allowed you to talk. Go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. I just wanted you to read question 3 again, if possible.
Sure. Consideration number 3 is,
Consideration.
yeah, does the defender make unfair contact with the opponent after playing the ball?
So it specifically says defender, correct?
That's correct. Or does
So-
the player basically?
Okay, so
Does the
it
player
doesn't-
committing the challenge?
Okay, because in that case, as soon as he touches the ball, he sort of becomes the offensive player. So
Not in the slightest. He's the player making a challenge for the ball.
okay,
Yeah, and this is a defender also. So that doesn't, kicking that ball like that doesn't put him in possession of the ball. It doesn't make him the possessor. These two are both challenging for a loose ball. The ball is loose here. They're both technically making a challenge for the ball. The difference is one player plays it in a way that creates unfair contact. And you can see the difference between the two. The yellow player starts to put his leg out, realizes he's not going to get there and that it's dangerous to put his leg out, and he pulls his leg back. See him starting to pull his leg back here?
mm-hmm.
The leg is bent. He's starting to retract his foot from the challenge because he knows it's not safe to do it. Contrast that with the red player who extends the leg, kicks the ball, and then leaves it straight out as he goes through. The red player never tries to back his leg out of that tackle. And that's why he ends up making that kind of contact right there with the opponent. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other show of hands? Any other questions anybody have? Okay, Luis, just allowed you to talk. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Hit the unmute button. All right, why don't you just go ahead and type your question in if you can't figure that one out. Okay, any other questions on this before we go? Alberto, go ahead.
You hear me?
Yep.
I just want to point out that that stretched leg from the red defender, it is not a coincidence. It is done on purpose. Yeah, it seems to be casual, but it's not. Those players, when they stretch the leg.
Okay, Alberto, I'm going to stop you. We don't know what the intention of the player is, so I'm going to stop you there. We don't consider intent when we're looking at decision. We take outcomes, okay? So moving forward, any other questions on this clip? Okay, then we'll move on to the next one. All right, we'll watch that one more time. So I think we can all agree that's a foul. So with a show of hands, who here has no card? Okay, good. Who here has yellow card? Okay, lots of hands raised. And who here has red card? We have a few hands raised here for red card. All right, I'm going to do a quick stop real quick. Those of you who said red card, please raise your hand one more time. Okay. So would any of you like to volunteer by raising your hand one more time to explain why you have red card here? Raise your hand if you'd like to. Okay, no volunteers, that's fine. So the thing that we have to consider on this challenge is the same thing we talked about two video clips ago, where the player stepped on the foot of the opponent. It was Pepe again, I think. So we got two red teams committing fouls here. The thing to ask yourself here, and again, this is where we have to recalibrate a little bit, is how much force is involved in this challenge? So if we go back to the very beginning and we watch this, how much force do we have in this challenge? Very little force used here. The player's running, he pokes his foot out, pokes his foot out really quickly to try to get to the ball, mistimes it, makes contact. Very little force in this challenge. So while the studs do capture the leg, there's little risk of injury to the opponent with this challenge because he reaches out for the ball, misses it, hits the leg there, but immediately brings the leg back. So as you can see here, he doesn't go through the opponent. Now, if this challenge had come in with force and the force of this challenge takes the defender this direction and he bends this player's leg, then absolutely we have force, we have a red card here. But with this challenge, and the most important part of this challenge is once the player makes contact with the opponent, he withdraws the leg. He brings the leg back. He bends the knee and pulls it away from the attacker there. If he goes through that challenge with a lot of speed and a lot of force, he probably breaks this player's leg, endangers the safety of the opponent, and we have a red card. But here, because he makes contact and immediately pulls his foot off and pulls it down, FIFA's guidance here is we have a yellow card. And the reason for it in the notes here, not enough force, not full impact, slight contact, and a quick pull back a bit. So again, the force part of this is where we're recalibrating. A year ago, this kind of contact, even at the professional level, we would have sent this player off. So for those of you who thought red, that would not have been incorrect until very recently. FIFA has seen a lot of red cards now when players aren't really intending to do any damage. They're not really doing any damage. This player mistimes this challenge by poking the foot out, no force, immediately pulls it back. And so what FIFA's trying to get away from is having players sent off for mistimed challenges that haven't been committed with excessive force. So again, this player that doesn't use any force in this challenge. He's running by, he sticks his foot out, he's standing when he does it. He can't generate a lot of force in that challenge. It's a trip, it's a mistimed challenge. It's absolutely reckless, it absolutely warrants a caution, but we should not send this player off for this challenge because of the lack of force. I want to contrast that with this challenge. When you watch the replay of this, the difference between the last one and this one, first of all, the contact is definitely made to a point of the body that can create injury. This is directly on the Achilles versus the last one we saw was on the side of the leg. But the most important one in this challenge is the amount of force. The player's running at a high speed and goes all the way through the player. And you can see here, when he makes the challenge, he's completely off the ground. He has no control of his body. And to be able to do that, he has to be coming in at a high speed. So there's a lot of speed, there's a lot of force in this challenge, as is evidenced by the fact that the player leaps off the ground. You can see there, no part of his body is touching the ground, which means he has to be using a lot of force to get to the challenge. And then follows through all the way the player to the point that the contact forces the foot up above the head. That amount of force involved in that challenge, if we go back and watch it in full speed, you can see it again. This has the kind of force that we want to see for send-offs. The player goes all the way through the opponent with this challenge. And as you can see, makes really, really bad contact on the back of the leg there. And again, when he goes off the challenge, completely off the ground. He has no control of his body. He's going at a high rate of speed and follows all the way through the challenge. He doesn't pull his leg back until he's fully completed the challenge, which means he went all the way through that player's foot with all the force of his body and with the tackle. That we need to issue a red card for. Show of hands for those who don't recognize the difference. I won't call you out. I just want to see who here doesn't recognize the difference between the last one we looked at and this one. Okay, so the key takeaway from the challenges we've seen so far is the use of force. We used to send players off for the tackle that we looked at on the last video, which is studs make contact with the side of the leg, the inside of the leg. We absolutely used to send off players for that kind of challenge. The difference now is FIFA wants us to be taking into consideration the speed and the force of a challenge when deciding whether or not we send off a player. And if a player doesn't use a lot of force in a challenge, then we're going to lean more towards a caution instead of a send-off. John, question? I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead and talk. Just unmute yourself.
Sorry, I guess I hit the button accidentally. Never mind.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so with our last 10 minutes, I'm going to go through a couple of examples of some contact to the face, because much like with tackles, FIFA is starting to request that we look at the amount of force being used when we have contact to the face. And so we're going to have a couple of looks at contact to the face. So here, there's definitely some contact made to the face of the opponent on this aerial challenge. But the force is insignificant here. I shouldn't say it's insignificant. It's not a very forceful. There's a medium amount of force. And we can tell because he doesn't really cock his arm. He doesn't swing it, nothing like that. He just raises it up into the face of the opponent as he jumps. So unlike a year or so ago, FIFA wants a caution for this. They don't want to send off for this because the player is definitely jumping up. He's definitely put his arm into the face of the opponent, but he hasn't swung it. There's not a lot of force in the challenge. And so we need to evaluate that when we decide to issue a caution here instead of a red card. Similarly, oh, mute yourself, whoever just laughed. This is 100% reckless. It's a caution, but there's no force in this. The player's running. He tries to spread his arms out to keep him back, ends up holding onto his head and tackling him. There's no force in that. So we want to issue a caution here, not a red card. And lastly, I think this is the one I want. Yep. Just let this one play because we'll get plenty of opportunities to see the replay. Again, we want to factor in force. Watch the white player. The left hand, upper left hand one is the one. Definitely makes contact with the face, but there's no force in that. We definitely want to issue a caution because we don't want to allow hands to the face like that, but there's not enough force in that to warrant a red card. There's no endangering the safety of this opponent with that contact to the face, which is why FIFA has said here a caution, not making contact with force to the opponent's face. So the big takeaway from this evening's review of these clips is we need to be training our eyes and anticipating the kind of challenges that we're going to see. So if you have a player taking a player on, In the attacking third, you can expect some sort of lower body foul, shift your focus there, and pay close attention to who's initiating the contact. And then more importantly, when you're deciding between a caution and a send-off, really start to consider the amount of force being used. And we all know what that really nasty, forceful tackle looks like. And so if a player commits that really harsh, fast, high speed, excessive force challenge and makes contact with the opponent, we have a green light to send them off. But if the tackle's not being committed with any force or with very moderate force, we're automatically, to some degree, going to lean to a yellow card. Any questions or concerns about that major takeaway from this evening's session? Because that's the big takeaway is we're going to start discerning the amount of force. Show of hands, any questions at this point? Steve, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. So the last video clip that we saw, because the white player has his back to, I guess that's a Costa Rican player, and slaps him in the face, that's caution. But if they were facing each other and that would have happened, that would be a red card.
That is incorrect. Because again, we're considering the use of force. So they actually changed the laws of the game now to state hands to the face has to include force if we're going to send a player off. Hands to the face or above the neck with you know, I can't remember the specific word that they use, but with basically with no force or with minimal contact, we're not going to show a red card. There needs to be force if we're going to show a red card moving forward. Because that was another factor. You had players who were, you know, sort of putting their hands towards each other's faces. In some cultures, that's a very common thing to do. Pats on the back of the head, you know, little minor slaps on the cheek as a warmful gesture, actually, not just a harsh one. But even still, we had the occasional, you know, moderate push to the face, or they try to push the chest, and their hands would raise up and catch the bottom of the face. If there's not force involved, we don't want to send a player off, because again, at the end of the day, the whole point of the red card is for challenges or conduct that endangers the safety of the opponent. And here, none of this is endangering the safety of the opponent. So even if they're facing each other, if there's minor contact to the face that's not forceful, we're not going to send a player off.
Is there any guidance for what constitutes forceful, like a slap, or how do you know whether it's forceful or not?
I think you have to use the context of the game. If, you know, these are professional players, if they make a little bit of contact to the face, if they go to push somebody or something like that, that's not a lot of force for them. If an 8-year-old pushes another 8-year-old in the face, do we want that kid in the game anymore? Probably not. So that you have to consider your surroundings. But no, you know, there's no pounds per square inch guidance from FIFA about what a significant amount of force is.